The Arctic wind howled, a banshee's wail that cut through flesh and bone. I, once a proud soldier, now lay broken and betrayed in this frozen wasteland. My comrades, those I had trusted with my life, had left me for dead. Their treachery burned hotter than the biting cold that gnawed at my extremities. I could feel my toes turning black with frostbite, the pain a constant reminder of my mortality. But pain was an old friend, one I had learned to embrace long ago. As I lay there, half buried in the snow, I recalled the faces of those who had abandoned me. Their names became a mantra, each syllable fueling the rage that kept my heart beating. Days passed, or perhaps it was weeks. Time lost all meaning in this white hell. I dragged myself through the snow, leaving a trail of blood and frozen skin behind me. The hunger was unbearable, a gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume me from within. And then I saw it, a hand protruding from the snow, the flesh blue and mottled. It was Krios, one of my betrayers. His frozen corpse became my salvation and my shelter. I tore into his flesh with my teeth, the act both revolting and exhilarating. As I consumed him, I felt his strength becoming mine. His body provided me with sustenance and shelter, a grotesque cocoon in which I could heal and plot my revenge. The taste of human flesh awakened something primal within me. Each bite was a promise of vengeance, each swallow a step closer to retribution. I found myself savoring the act, deriving a perverse pleasure from consuming those who had wronged me. As I regained my strength, I began to hunt. The Arctic wasteland became my hunting ground, and my former comrades my prey. I tracked them through blizzards and across treacherous ice fields, my determination growing with each passing day. The first one I found was Lyra, the medic who had declared me beyond saving. I watched her from afar, studying her movements, learning her routines. When the moment was right, I struck. My powers over ice, once used to protect, now became instruments of torture. I encased her legs in ice, watching with fascination as the frost crept up her body. "Esdeath!" she gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief and terror. "But you're dead." I smiled, feeling my cracked lips split and bleed. I was, and now, so are you. I took my time with Lyra, experimenting with different ways to inflict pain. I discovered that I could form ice needles and drive them under her nails, eliciting the most exquisite screams. The sound was music to my ears, a symphony of suffering that made my heart race with excitement. As Lyra's life ebbed away, I leaned in close, whispering, "Thank you for teaching me the true meaning of pain." The rush I felt as the light faded from her eyes was indescribable. It was more than satisfaction. It was ecstasy. I had tasted power, and I craved more. One by one, I hunted down my betrayers. Each death was more elaborate, more agonizing than the last. I reveled in their suffering, drinking in their screams like the sweetest nectar. With each kill, I felt myself growing stronger, more in tune with the icy powers that coursed through my veins. Marcus, the sharpshooter, I blinded with shards of ice before leaving him to wander the tundra. His desperate cries as he stumbled through the snow, lost and afraid, were a constant source of amusement. When I finally ended his misery, it was almost disappointing. Zara, our explosives expert, provided me with a particularly creative opportunity. I froze the air in her lungs, watching as panic set in and she gasped for breath. The fear in her eyes as she realized what was happening was intoxicating. I let her suffer for hours, alternating between allowing her to breathe and choking her with ice until she begged for death. With each kill, I felt myself slipping further into darkness. But it wasn't a descent, it was an ascent. I was rising above the weakness of my former self, becoming something greater, something terrible and beautiful. The last of my betrayers was Callum, our former captain. He had been the one to give the order to leave me behind. I saved him for last, wanting him to feel the full weight of what he had created. I found him holed up in an abandoned research station, paranoid and on edge. The others' disappearances had not gone unnoticed. When I finally revealed myself, the look of horror on his face was priceless. What are you?" he stammered, backing away from me. I advanced slowly, savoring his fear. "I am what you made me, Callum. I am vengeance incarnate." For days I tormented him. I used my powers to create a storm around the station, trapping him inside with me. The howling wind carried the echoes of his screams, a constant reminder of his impending doom. I froze and thawed his limbs repeatedly, watching as frostbite set in and his flesh began to rot. The smell of decay filled the air, a putrid reminder of the fragility of human life. Callum's mind began to fracture under the constant torture, and I reveled in his descent into madness. "Why are you doing this?" he sobbed, his voice hoarse from screaming. I cupped his face in my hands, my touch burning his skin with cold. "Because I can," I whispered. "Because it feels good." And it did feel good. Each cry of pain, each whimper of fear sent shivers of pleasure down my spine. I had discovered a new kind of ecstasy in inflicting suffering, and I never wanted it to end. As Callum's life finally slipped away, I felt a sense of completion. My vengeance was achieved, but the hunger for more remained. I realized then that this was just the beginning. Standing amidst the carnage of my revenge, surrounded by the frozen corpses of those who had wronged me, I made a vow. I would become the strongest, the most ruthless being this world had ever known. Life and death would be mine to command, and I would revel in the power to inflict both. The military, once my home, became my playground. I rose through the ranks with terrifying speed, my reputation for cruelty preceding me. Soldiers trembled at the mention of my name, and commanders scrambled to stay on my good side. I took on the most dangerous missions, the ones deemed suicidal by others. Each battle was an opportunity to hone my skills, to push the boundaries of my powers. I froze entire battlefields, turning them into grotesque ice sculptures of war. The sight of my enemies trapped in their final moments of terror became my favorite form of art. But it wasn't enough to simply kill. I needed to savor each death, to draw out the suffering for as long as possible. I developed new techniques, ways to keep my victims alive and conscious even as their bodies were destroyed. One particularly memorable battle saw me facing off against a rebel army. Their leader, a man known for his brutality, thought he could match my cruelty. I proved him wrong in the most horrific way possible. I created a massive arena of ice, trapping his entire army inside. Then, one by one, I picked them off. I impaled some on spikes of ice, leaving them to bleed out slowly. Others I buried alive in snow, their muffled screams a constant background noise. For the leader, I saved a special fate. I encased him in a shell of ice, leaving only his head exposed. Then I began to lower the temperature around him, degree by degree. I watched with fascination as his body temperature dropped, as his blood began to crystallize in his veins. The pain must have been excruciating, but I kept him conscious throughout the entire process. "Do you feel it?" I asked him, my voice soft and almost loving. "This is true power. This is what it means to hold life and death in your hands." His only response was a gurgled scream as his organs began to shut down. When he finally died, his body nothing more than a frozen husk, I felt a sense of disappointment. It had ended too quickly. As news of my exploits spread, I gained a reputation as a demon in human form. Enemies surrendered rather than face me in battle. Allies kept their distance, fear evident in their eyes whenever I was near. I reveled in their terror, feeding off it like a drug. But with each victory, with each life snuffed out, I felt a growing emptiness. The thrill of the kill was becoming harder to achieve. I needed more, always more. I began to experiment on my own soldiers, pushing them to their limits and beyond. I would freeze parts of their bodies, then force them to continue fighting. Those who survived became stronger, more resilient. Those who didn't, well, they served as examples to the others. My quest for power became all-consuming. I sought out ancient artifacts, forbidden knowledge, anything that could increase my abilities. Each new power I gained only fueled my desire for more. And yet, in the quiet moments between battles, in the stillness of the night, I sometimes caught a glimpse of my reflection in the ice. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, eyes cold and empty, a smile that promised only pain. I wondered briefly what I had become, but then the moment would pass, and the hunger would return. The need to inflict suffering, to dominate and destroy, would overwhelm any lingering doubts. This was who I was now. This was who I was always meant to be. As I stand here now, atop a mountain of frozen corpses, I survey the world before me. It's a world ripe for conquest, full of new victims waiting to experience my particular brand of cruelty. The path ahead is clear. I will continue to rise, to grow stronger, to become the ultimate arbiter of life and death. For I am Esdeath, the Ice Queen, and my reign of terror has only just begun. The world will tremble before me, and I will savor every scream, every plea for mercy. In pain and suffering, I have found my true calling, and I will never, ever stop.